My world was a cage, not of iron bars, but of scorn, of whispered slurs that followed my every step. Omega, lowborn, unwanted. In the ancient, frost-bitten realm of the iron-tooth mountain packs, I was nothing, the dust beneath the paws of Alphas, the forgotten sigh of a dying fire. They called me Talia. But in the deepest, most secret hollow of my soul, I knew I was more. There was a song in my blood, a silent, waiting storm that I dared not name. I lived in the shadow of the great Alpha King, Kaelen. They called him the Stormbringer, a ruler carved from winter's heart, whose very gaze could freeze a warrior's courage. His castle, a jagged silhouette against the weeping sky, loomed over our village like a promise of perpetual night. The day it happened was the day of the blood moon gathering, a day of allegiance, of tribute, a day where Omegas, like me, were brought forth to serve. I kept my head bowed, my threadbare cloak pulled tight, a ghost among the vibrant, fearful crowd. I prayed to the moon, to anything, that I would remain invisible. But fate is a cruel and cunning weaver. The crowd parted before him like wheat before a scythe. King Kaelen descended the dais, his black fur mantle flowing like liquid shadow. The air itself grew heavy, charged with the raw, terrifying power of an alpha unmasked. He moved, not towards the noble-born Omegas adorned in silk, but through them. His ice-blue eyes, sharp as shattered glass, swept the sea of faces. And then they stopped. On me. My breath caught, a sharp, painful stitch in my chest. The world blurred, the noise faded into a distant roar. He took one step, then another. The crowd fell into a deathly hush, 1,000 eyes widening in disbelief. He stopped, an arm's length away, so close I could feel the heat radiating from him, so close I could see the flecks of silver in his glacial stare. You. His voice was not a shout, but a low rumble that vibrated in the very stone beneath our feet. Look at me. A command, an alpha command that thrummed against my will. Trembling, against every instinct, screaming to submit, to flee, I lifted my chin. Our eyes locked, and the universe shattered. It was not a sound, but a feeling, a cataclysm in my soul, a golden thread, searing and brilliant, shot from my heart to his. The air crackled with unseen energy. The mark on my inner wrist, the faded Omega symbol I had always hidden, it blazed with a sudden painful light. A mirroring heat flared on King Kaelen's own arm, visible beneath his vambrace. His eyes, they flashed from icy blue to a blazing molten gold, then back again. His breath hitched, the only crack in his impenetrable armor. A collective gasp tore through the crowd. Whispers exploded like sparks. The bond. The fated mate bond. But she's a lowborn. His closest beta, a grim-faced warrior named Roran, stepped forward, his hand on his sword hilt. My king, what sorcery is this? Kaelen did not look away from me. His expression was a war, shock, fury, a dawning, terrifying recognition. The bond between us pulsed, a living, breathing thing of pure light and utter chaos. It sang of destiny, it screamed of ruin. His jaw tightened, the storm in his eyes raged. When he finally spoke, his words were not for the crowd, not for his beta. They were for me alone, each one dropping like a stone into the silent well of my fate. Take her, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, stripped of all emotion. To the castle, to the highest tower. Let no one near her. His gaze finally tore from mine, sweeping over his stunned people, his jaw set like granite. This changes nothing. But as the king's guards, their faces a mask of confusion and disgust, closed cold hands around me, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me deeper than the mountain wind, everything had changed. The bond was ignited, and it would either be our salvation, or it would burn this entire kingdom to ashes. The ascent to the tower was a blur of cold stone and colder stairs. The guards' grips were impersonal, bruising, as if handling a cursed object, not a person. Their silence was louder than any accusation. I could hear their thoughts as clearly as if they'd shouted them. Lowborn, Omega, how, why? The same questions screamed in the hollow of my own skull. We climbed endless spiraling stairs that bit into my bare feet. The air grew thinner, sharper. Finally, they thrust me into a circular room at the very peak of the Stormbringer's fortress. The door, thick oak banded with iron, closed with a definitive thunderous boom. The key turned. The lock clicked. And then, silence. Not true silence. The wind howled outside, gnawing at the stone like a wild beast. But inside, a profound aching emptiness. I was alone, yet I was not. The bond was a living wire strung taut between my soul and his, buzzing with a low, constant hum. I could feel him, a dark, turbulent presence somewhere far below in the heart of the castle, a storm contained within stone walls. I wrapped my arms around me, shivering. The room was not a dungeon. It held a narrow bed, a wash basin, a small window slit. It was a gilded cage, a prison for a mystery. My eyes fell to my wrist. The Omega mark, once a pale, shameful brand, now shimmered with a faint, persistent golden light. Proof, a truth I could not escape. Hours bled into shadows. The light from the window slit faded from gray to black. I did not sleep. I listened to the wind, to the distant muffled sounds of the castle, to the terrifying, unfamiliar song in my own blood. Then, footsteps. Not the heavy tread of guards. These were measured, deliberate. They stopped outside my door. The key turned again. He did not enter immediately. The door swung inward, and he filled the space. King Kaelen. Without his mantle, dressed in a simple dark tunic, he seemed somehow more real, more dangerous. The raw, untamed power was not softened, it was concentrated. The bond between us ignited the moment he stepped across the threshold, a physical pull that made my breath catch. He stood just inside the door, his gaze sweeping the room, before landing on me with the weight of a mountain. His expression was unreadable, carved from ice and shadow. You. His voice was not a shout, but a low rumble that vibrated in the very stone beneath our feet. This bond, he began, his voice low, cutting through the chill. It is a mistake, a flaw in the magic of our world. It cannot be. You understand this.
It was not a question. It was a decree. Each word was a shard of ice aimed at the fragile hope the bond had kindled in me. I found my voice, a mere whisper against the gale of his certainty. The moon does not make mistakes, my king. His eyes flashed, that molten gold flickering beneath the blue for a heartbeat, a sign the bond fought him too. The moon is cruel, he countered, taking a single slow step forward. The space in the room shrank. It ties a king to a girl from the mud. It threatens the stability of a kingdom built on order, on bloodlines. I did not ask for this, I said, a spark of defiance igniting in my chest, fanned by the bond's warmth. It felt like a betrayal of my own nature, an Omega defying her Alpha, her king. No, he agreed, his tone chillingly flat, which makes it all the more inconvenient. My council, my generals, they are already whispering. They see this not as destiny, but as weakness, vulnerability in their fortress of a king. He took another step. Now I could see the tension in the line of his jaw, the barely restrained tempest in his eyes. They believe you are a spell weaver, a witch sent by the rival Sunfang pack to ensnare me. The accusation hung in the air, more suffocating than the tower's solitude. A witch, punishable by death. My defiance crumbled into dread. I am no witch. I have no power. Don't you? He finally closed the distance, not touching me, but looming so close the heat from his body was a brand. His gaze dropped to my glowing wrist. This says otherwise. This phenomenon has not happened in 10 generations. What are you? The question was a raw plea, masked as a demand. In that moment, I saw it, not just the angry king, but the man bewildered by a force greater than his own will. The bond thrummed between us, a conduit for his confusion, his fury, and a terrifying sliver of something else, a fascination as deep as it was unwilling. I looked up into his stormy eyes, my own filling with tears I refused to shed. I am Talia, I whispered, the words of vow and a plea, and I am as much a prisoner of this as you are. He stared at me, his breath a visible cloud in the cold air between our lips. The silence stretched, taut and singing with the energy of the bond. For a heartbeat, I saw the conflict raging within him, the ruler warring with the man, destiny warring with duty. Then the shutters closed. His expression hardened back into impenetrable stone. He took a sharp step back, as if burned by my proximity. "You will stay here," he declared, his voice once more the iron command of the Stormbringer. "You will be protected and watched until I determine what manner of threat you truly pose." He turned and left, the door closing with a softer click this time. But his presence did not leave. It lingered in the bond, a dark, brooding shadow at the edge of my soul. He had called me a threat, a witch, a mistake. But as I stood alone in the tower, feeling the golden thread that connected me to the most powerful being in the realm pulse with a steady, stubborn light, a new, terrifying thought took root. What if the real threat wasn't me? What if the real threat was what this bond would force him to become? And what if the kingdom he was so desperate to protect was already rotting from within? The whispers of his counsel, were they just fear, or were they the first signs of a coming betrayal? The wind screamed outside, but a deeper chill settled in my bones. I was a prisoner in a tower, but I was also a spark, and I had just been dropped into a castle full of kindling. Days in the tower bled into a strange, suspended rhythm. The world was reduced to the view from the window slit, a sliver of angry gray sky and the distant dark teeth of the Iron-Tooth Mountains. My only human contact was a silent elderly maid named Elara, who brought simple meals and fresh water. Her eyes, the color of weathered bark, held no malice, only a deep, sorrowful caution. She never spoke, but once, as she placed a bowl of stew on the small table, her gnarled finger brushed my glowing wrist. She flinched back as if scorched, her gaze flying to mine, wide with something that looked like awe, fear. She left quicker than usual that day. The bond was a constant humming presence. I learned to read its subtle shifts. When Kaelen was in council, it thrummed with a low, irritated vibration. When he was on the training grounds, it pulsed with a fierce, competitive energy. And in the deep of night, it sometimes softened into a quiet, contemplative hum that felt lonely. It was an intimate violation and a profound connection all at once. I knew the texture of his moods without seeing his face, and the knowledge was a heavy, secret burden. Then, on the 7th night, the rhythm broke. The bond suddenly spiked, a violent alarm, then a cold, seeping dread. It was so strong it knocked the breath from my lungs. I stumbled to the window, peering into the moonless dark. Shouts, muffled by distance and stone, rose from the lower courtyards. Torchlight, chaotic and swift, moved like angry fireflies through the bailey. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. My door crashed open. It was not Ilara. It was Roaring, the king's beta, his face a grim mask in the flickering light of the torch he carried. His usual composure was gone. His eyes were sharp, scanning me as if assessing a weapon. "Come, now, do not speak." The command brooked no argument. Heart hammering against my ribs, I followed him out of the tower, down the endless stairs I had climbed as a captive. But this was not a release. The castle was a stirred hive of tension. Guards ran in tight formations, their armor clattering. Whispers hissed through the corridors like venomous snakes. Found in the lower vaults, the sacred alpha relics, the king's own seal. Roaring guided me not to a grand hall or a dungeon, but to a small windowless antechamber deep within the castle's heart. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and cold fear, and there, in the center of the room, stood Kaelen. He looked different. The controlled storm was now a visible tempest, his hair disheveled, his shirt sleeves rolled up, revealing the corded muscles of his forearms, and the mate mark, mirroring mine, glowing with that same relentless, accusing light. In his hand, he clutched a small, ornate dagger. Its hilt was wrought in the shape of a wolf, but its blade was dark and twisted, made of a strange, non-reflective stone.
He didn't look at me at first. His gaze was fixed on the dagger, his knuckles white around the hilt. "Someone," he said, his voice a dangerous, quiet rasp that filled the small room, "has broken into the sealed vault. The vault that holds the kingdom's oldest, most dangerous secrets. Nothing was taken." He finally lifted his eyes to mine. The storm in them was directed at me, full force. But this was left on the altar, in its place. He turned the dagger, and the torchlight caught an inscription on the blade. 2 words, carved in the ancient tongue of the first wolves. I couldn't read it, but I didn't need to. The meaning was clear from his face. "What does it say?" My voice was a thread. "The Omega's truth," Roaring translated flatly, his distrust of me a physical weight in the air. The world tilted. The Omega's truth. It could only mean me. This was a frame, a deliberate, malicious act to tie the breach directly to my presence, to prove I was the witch they feared. Kaelen took a step toward me. The bond screamed with his conflict, the part of him that felt the undeniable pull of our connection, warring with the king who saw only evidence of treachery. "You have not left the tower. Ilar has confirmed it. No one has seen you near the lower levels." He stated facts, his eyes searching mine for a lie. "So tell me, Talia of no pack, how does your truth come to be etched on a blasphemous blade placed in the heart of my kingdom's sanctum?" I met his gaze, the fear hardening into a sharp point of clarity. This was the game. This was the first move against him, using me as the pawn. The bond thrummed, not with guilt, but with a desperate, clean urgency. "I have no truth but my own, my king," I said, forcing the words past the tightness in my throat. "And it is this: I am no one's weapon, but it seems someone believes I can be yours. They have not tried to steal your treasures. They have tried to steal your judgment. They have placed this here to make you look at me and see only an enemy." I took a shaking step forward, drawn by the bond and a courage I didn't know I possessed. My eyes fell to the glowing marks on both our wrists. They are using this against you. They fear this bond, and they are showing you they will stop at nothing to make you destroy it, and me." The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the pop of the torch. Roran looked between us, his hand resting on his sword hilt. Kaelen's expression was unreadable, but the storm in his eyes had shifted. The outright accusation had morphed into a furious, calculating thought. He was listening, not to my words, but to the bond between us, to the pure, untainted thread of my terror and my defiance, which held no deceit. He looked from the dagger to me, and then to the mark on his own skin, glowing in the dim room. A slow, dawning horror crept into his gaze, not of me, but of the situation. The enemy was not at the gates. The enemy was within his walls, touching his most sacred spaces, and they had made their opening move. He straightened, the king once more, but a king now staring into a different kind of abyss. "Roran," he said, his voice now cold and clear. "Double the guard on the vault. Question everyone, but do it quietly." His eyes returned to me, holding mine for a long heartbeat. "And take her back to the tower." It was not a victory. I was still a prisoner, but as Roaring led me away, I glanced back. Kaelen was not looking at the dagger anymore. He was staring at the closed door, his face etched with a new, profound tension. The threat had a name now. It was shadowy and it was cunning, and it had just proven it could strike at the very soul of his power. The game was on, and I, the Lowborn Omega in the tower, was now the central piece on the board. The question screamed in the silence of my soul as I climbed back to my cage. Whose move was next? The tower no longer felt like just a prison. It felt like the eye of a gathering storm. The phantom echo of that cursed dagger, the Omega's truth, seemed to hang in the cold air. Ilara came and went like a ghost, her eyes now filled with a new, profound pity. She left a small woolen shawl once, folding it neatly on the bed. An unexpected kindness in this fortress of suspicion. I clung to it, both for warmth and as a tiny anchor to a humanity that seemed to be dissolving around me. The bond was my only tether to the world below. Kaelen's presence through it was a constant, brooding pressure. The initial shock had settled into a grinding, relentless vigilance. I could feel his sleepless nights, the hours spent in secret council with Roran, the simmering fury at the violation of his vault. He was hunting a ghost in his own house. Then, 3 nights after the dagger, the bond did something new. It pulled. Not a gentle tug, but a sharp, insistent yank deep in my core, as if a hook had been set behind my breastbone. It came from below, from the west wing of the castle, and along with the pull came a wave of emotion so potent it stole my breath. Not anger, not suspicion, but a deep, resonant sorrow, a grief so old and vast it felt like staring into a starless night. I gasped, my hand flying to my chest. This was not a mood I was sensing from a distance. This was an invitation, a silent cry down the tether that bound us. He was alone, and he was hurting. Before reason could stop me, I was at the door. It was, as always, locked. I pressed my palm against the cold, rough wood, as if I could feel his presence through it. The pull came again, more urgent, a plea woven from pure feeling. My eyes darted to the window slit. The rain was a sheer silver curtain. No one would be on the high battlements tonight. A mad, impossible idea sparked. The bond hummed in agreement, a reckless golden courage flooding my veins. I moved to the narrow bed, my fingers trembling as I tore the coarse linen sheet into long, sturdy strips. My hands, usually so clumsy, worked with a frantic, focused speed I didn't recognize. I knotted the strips together, my heart a wild drum against my ribs. This was madness. If I was caught... But the bond's pull was a siren song, overriding fear. I secured one end of my makeshift rope to the leg of the heavy bed frame, testing it with all my weight. It held. I threw the other end out the window slit, watching it vanish into the rainy darkness.
With a final prayer to the uncaring moon, I climbed out into the storm. The wind and rain lashed at me, soaking me to the skin in an instant. The stone was slick, the linen strips biting into my palms. I descended blindly, by feel alone, guided only by that magnetic pull in my soul. Down, down, into the gusting darkness. Once my foot slipped, and I swung wildly, my stomach lurching, before finding purchase again. The bond thrummed with a spike of alarm, his alarm, feeling my peril, and then a surge of focus, as if he was somehow steadying me from afar. I reached the end of my rope, dangling over a lower balcony. With a desperate swing, I let go, tumbling onto the wet stones in a heap. I lay there for a second, gasping, rain pelting my face. The pull was stronger here. Directly ahead was a pair of tall, arched doors, slightly ajar. Light, warm and flickering, spilled out onto the rain-slicked balcony. Silently, I crept forward and peered inside. It was a library, but unlike any I could have imagined. Vast, cavernous, shelves stretching up into shadowed heights. The air smelled of old leather, dried herbs, and melancholy. And there, in a pool of firelight from a massive hearth, sat Kaelen. He was not the Stormbringer king. He was a man, slumped in a high-backed chair, his head bowed. In his hands he cradled not a sword or a scepter, but a small, faded portrait on a wooden disc. The bond in my chest ached in unison with the silent grief pouring from him. I must have made a sound, a soft intake of breath, the drip of water from my clothes. His head snapped up. His eyes, reflected in the firelight, were not icy, but raw and red-rimmed. The shock on his face was absolute. He saw the wild tangle of my hair, the soaked, simple dress, the mud on my feet from the gardens below the balcony. "By the moon," he breathed, the words barely audible over the crackle of the fire and the drum of the rain. He did not shout for guards. He did not rage. He just stared, as if I were an apparition conjured by his sorrow. "You called," I whispered, the words leaving me before I could stop them. I took a hesitant step into the room, the warmth of the fire a shock against my chilled skin. He looked down at the portrait in his hands, then back at me, his expression crumbling from kingly isolation into profound confusion. I was thinking of my mother," he said, his voice thick. "She died in this wing, a fever. They could do nothing." He held up the portrait, a painting of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, wearing a simple crown. "She was an Omega, like you." The revelation struck me like a physical blow. The great Stormbringer king, son of an Omega? It was a truth the kingdom had clearly buried. An Omega queen was unthinkable in their current order. "They never speak of her," he continued, his gaze distant, fixed on the flames. "Her memory as an embarrassment to the council, a softness in the royal line. To honor her is to show weakness." He finally looked at me, his eyes tracing the lines of my face, the water dripping from my hair. "You climbed down the tower in a storm," he stated, a trace of bewildered awe in his voice. "You called me in a storm," I replied, my voice barely a whisper. For a long moment, we just looked at each other, the Alpha King and the Lowborn Omega, standing together in a secret library with the ghost of a gentle queen and the scheming of an hidden enemy as our only witnesses. The bond glowed warm and steady between us, a fragile bridge over a canyon of duty, fear, and legacy. He did not touch me, but the space between us felt charged, alive. The game had just changed. The enemy had sought to use our bond as a weapon, but in this moment of shared, rain-soaked vulnerability, they had inadvertently forged it into something else, something dangerously like an alliance. The library, that haven of whispered sorrow and firelight, could not hold us. Dawn's pale fingers, cruel and revealing, soon crept across the worn tapestries. The storm had passed, leaving a world washed clean and bitterly cold. The bond, that golden thread, still hummed between our souls, but the world of stone and duty rushed back in with the light. Kaelen's face, so raw and unguarded mere hours before, hardened like cooling wax. The king's mask descended. He did not speak of his mother again. He did not speak of the pull that had drawn me through the tempest. With a curt command that brooked no discussion, he summoned Roran. The beta arrived swiftly, his sharp eyes missing nothing. My damp, disheveled state, the king's own weary posture, the intimate proximity in which he found us.
The beta arrived swiftly, his sharp eyes missing nothing. My damp, disheveled state, the king's own weary posture, the intimate proximity in which he found us. A flicker of something. Disapproval? Concern passed over his stern features, but he bowed his head in silence. "The Omega," Kaelen said, his voice once more the crack of winter ice, "is to be moved. The North Spire, the chamber adjacent to the royal archives. She is to have no window to the outside world." His gaze, when it finally met mine, was impenetrable. "You will be closer to the heart of the castle, and further from the sky you seem so adept at traversing." It was not kindness, it was strategy. The North Spire was deep within the fortress's marrow, a place of dust and forgotten records, easily watched and impossible to escape. He was locking away the vulnerability I had witnessed, burying it in stone and shadows. My new chamber was smaller, darker. It smelled of parchment and age. A single oil lamp cast a feeble glow. There was a narrow bed, a desk, and shelves lined with crumbling scrolls. No balcony, no view, just one heavy door, and the constant, quiet presence of a guard outside. Yet the bond told a different story. The turbulent storm of his emotions had settled into a grim, focused determination. The sorrow was buried, but not gone, a deep, hidden current under a frozen river. And now, intertwined with it, was a new thread, a sharp, protective vigilance that encircled my presence in his consciousness. He had not cast me out, he had drawn me in, closer. Ilara continued her silent ministrations. One afternoon, as she placed a tray of bread and broth on the desk, her eyes fell upon a scroll that had tumbled from the shelf. It was older than the others, its edges frayed to lace. A crude drawing was visible, a wolf with two heads, one light, one dark, circling a glowing symbol that looked like our intertwined mate marks. She snatched her hand back as if from a flame. For the first time she spoke. Her voice was a dry rustle, like dead leaves. "The twin alpha prophecy," she whispered, her eyes wide with dread. "It is forbidden lore. It speaks of a bond that splits a king and bleeds a kingdom dry." Before I could ask a single question, she fled, leaving the scroll on the floor like a cursed thing. My heart hammered. Forbidden lore. A bond that splits a king. I unrolled the scroll with trembling hands. The script was archaic, almost illegible. It spoke of an ancient time when a fated bond had ignited not between an alpha and an omega, but between an alpha king and another of latent, hidden alpha spirit, a twin alpha bond. The kingdom had been torn asunder by civil war, brother against brother, power against its own echo. The scroll ended with a bleak warning. "The bonded king shall be divided in his own soul. His strength shall become his contradiction. Only by the shedding of the second heart, or the merging of two crowns into one unseen, shall the realm find peace." A cold deeper than any mountain chill seeped into my bones. A second heart? A latent alpha spirit? Nonsense. I was an omega, lowborn, weak. The glowing mark on my wrist pulsed as if in argument.
That evening the bond surged with a different energy, not sorrow, but sharp intrigue. Shortly after, the lock on my door turned. It was not a guard, it was Kaelen. He held a large leather-bound ledger in his hands. His expression was that of a hunter on a scent. "The vault records," he said without preamble, placing the ledger on my desk. "Meticulous accounts of every artifact, every seal, every relic, kept by the master of vaults, an old wolf named Goran." He opened the ledger to a recent page, his finger stabbing at an entry. "See here, the entry for the Darkstone dagger, the one left for us. It is logged as inspected and secure on the very day it was found planted on the altar." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming in the lamplight. "Goran has served my family for 50 years. His loyalty was unquestioned, or so I believed." He turned the page. "He was found this morning in his quarters, a vial of wolfsbane beside his empty cup, an apparent suicide, a confession of guilt by despair." The air left the room. A suicide, too neat, too convenient. "You do not believe it," I breathed. "The bond tells me you feel the same twist in your gut that I do," he said, his voice low. "This was not a guilty man taking his own life. This was a loyal man silenced. The dagger was a message. Goran's death is the punctuation." He closed the ledger with a definitive thud. "The enemy is not merely sowing discord. They are pruning witnesses. They are inside my walls, my vaults, my council, and they are cleaning their trail as they go." He paced the small room, his energy making the confined space feel smaller. He stopped pacing and looked at me, truly looked at me, not as a problem or a pawn, but as a mind in the tangled web. "You are educated. You read the old scripts on the scrolls here." It was not a question. I nodded, glancing at the forbidden scroll now hidden under my mattress. "Good," he said. "Then you will help me. You will go through these archives, look for anything, any law, any precedent, any forgotten prophecy that pertains to fated bonds, to Omega Queens, to challenges against a bonded king. The enemy uses old stories as weapons. We must arm ourselves with the same." He was asking for my help, the Lowborn Omega in the library tower. The spark of alliance in the rain had just been fanned into a deliberate flame. "And what will you do, my king?" I asked. A shadow passed over his face, fierce and grim. "I will mourn an old servant, and then I will start a different hunt, one that does not look for thieves in the night, but the wolf who wears the face of a friend, smiling as he sharpens his knife." He left then, taking the heavy ledger and the weight of his suspicion with him. But he left a greater weight behind, a purpose and a terrifying, unspoken question that echoed the forbidden scroll's warning. If the enemy was truly within, a wolf among his own pack, then who could the king trust? Perhaps only the one owned to him by moon-forged magic, the one the entire kingdom believed was his greatest weakness. I turned to the shelves of forgotten history, the lamp guttering low. The enemy had secrets, but so did this castle, so did this bond.
The enemy had secrets, but so did this castle, so did this bond. And somewhere in the dust and the shadows, buried beneath layers of lies and legacy, was a truth that could save us, or destroy us utterly. The archives became my world, a world of dust, whispers, and the relentless silent song of the bond. By day, the weak sun filtered through a high, narrow ventilation shaft, illuminating motes of ancient history. By night, the single oil lamp painted monsters and mysteries upon the walls of scrolls. Kaelen's command had been clear: find the old stories. But the more I read, the more the clean lines of our reality blurred. The text spoke not of simple alphas and omegas, but of the old blood, the primal, untamed power that flowed before laws and structures tamed it. They spoke of the lycanthropos, the wolf within, a spirit separate from the man, slumbering in the blood of all our kind. In an alpha, this inner wolf was a dominant, conscious force, a partner in rule. In an omega, it was said to be a gentle, submissive thing, a quiet comfort. But the forbidden scrolls, they whispered different tales. Tales of omegas in ages past, whose inner wolves did not sleep, whose wolves carried a different kind of power, not of dominion, but of perception, of unity, of seeing the threads that bound the pack's soul together, and of sensing when those threads were frayed by deceit. As I read these words, a strange heat bloomed in my chest, not the bond's warmth, but something deeper, older, a stirring, a recognition in my own blood that made the fine hairs on my arms stand erect. The bond itself was changing. It was no longer just a tether of emotion. When Kaelen was near, I began to perceive echoes. Not words, but impressions. The sharp metallic scent of his suspicion, the phantom pressure of a sword hilt in his palm, the cold weight of the crown upon his brow. And once, when his frustration peaked during a contentious council, I felt the distinct predatory ripple of his own inner wolf rising to the surface, a magnificent, terrifying beast of storm and shadow, all lupine power and regal fury. My own breath would catch in those moments. A primal part of me, something buried beneath a lifetime of omega conditioning, did not flinch in fear. It noticed. It paid attention. One evening, as dusk bled into the archives, the bond flared with a new urgent signal. Not emotion, but a pure physical warning, a spike of predatory alertness from Kaelen's wolf. Danger. Close. Seconds later, the door to my chamber swung open. It was not Kaelen. It was Lord Theron, a member of the King's High Council, a wolf of elegant silver hair and eyes the color of a shallow stream, clear, but with nothing warm beneath the surface. He was known as a voice of tradition, of strict adherence to the old hierarchies. "The little Omega scholar," he said, his smile not touching his eyes. He stepped inside, his fine robes whispering against the stone floor. The guard outside was conspicuously absent. The king indulges you with his historical curiosities. I rose slowly from the desk, my heart pounding a wild rhythm against my ribs. My inner senses, those newly awakened threads, screamed in silent alarm. This wolf's scent was wrong. It was layered, the top note of polished civility, but beneath it, the cold, sour tang of ambition, and something else, something masked by cloves and mint. "The king commands my study, my lord," I said, keeping my voice low, my eyes downcast in the expected Omega deference. But inside, the stirring thing in my chest pressed against its cage. "Look, see. Study is a privilege for those who know their place," Theron mused, drifting closer, his fingers trailing over the scroll on my desk, the one about pack soul perception. "Some believe too much knowledge can unbalance a simple mind, make it aspire to heights for which it is not biologically fashioned." He stopped before me, too close. The bond thrummed with Kaelen's distant, rising fury. He sensed my distress, but he was too far away. "Tell me, child," his murmuring, predatory gaze fixed on my throat, on the pulse he could surely see fluttering there. "Has your connection to our king shown you anything interesting, any weaknesses in our fortress, any vulnerabilities in the Stormbringer's heart?" The question was a trap, coated in honeyed venom. To answer was to admit to spying. To defy was to defy a high council lord. The sour scent of his hidden intent grew stronger, cloying. And in that moment, the stirring in my chest burst. Not a shift, not a change, but a sense. My vision did not darken, but its world unveiled itself. I saw not just Lord Theron, the man, but the ghostly, shimmering outline of his inner wolf, a sleek, gray creature with cunning eyes and bared teeth.
and around him, like frayed, blackened threads, I saw the connections he had severed, and the new, dark, pulsing threads that reached out from him, winding through the castle like poisonous vines, connecting to other shadowy forms I could not quite see. He was the fray in the pack soul. He was the poison. I took an involuntary step back, my hand flying to my own chest. The gasp I let out was real, born of awe and terror. Theron's placid mask slipped. He saw the change in my eyes, the dilation of my pupils, the way I looked through him. "What is this?" he hissed, his own civility vanishing. "What do you see, witch?" The door crashed open with a force that shook the stone. Kaelen stood framed in the doorway, but he was not fully Kaelen. His eyes blazed with that molten gold, and the air around him warped with the immense presence of his inner lupine wolf. A low, reverberating growl emanated from his chest, a sound that was more beast than man. "Theron," the king's voice was the grinding of tectonic plates. "You are far from the council chambers." Theron recoiled, his own wolf's submission instinct kicking in violently under the direct, unrestrained dominance of his alpha. The slick mask of politician slammed back into place. "My king, I was merely checking on the welfare of your guest. The castle is unsettled since Goron's tragic passing." "Leave." The one word was absolute. It carried the weight of command and the promise of violence. "The welfare of what is mine alone to ascertain." Theron bowed, low and swift, but as he passed Kaelen, his eyes flickered to me one last time. They held no fear of reprimand. They held a cold, recalculating interest. He had not found a spy. He had found something else. Something unforeseen. When he was gone, Kaelen turned to me. The gold in his eyes slowly receded, but the predatory awareness did not. He saw my trembling hands, my wide, seeing eyes.
"What happened?" he demanded, striding forward. "The bond, it was like a silent scream, and then a flash of light inside you." I looked up at him, my new sight still lingering. I could see the magnificent, storm-wreathed wolf that lived within him, its head raised in protective vigilance. I could see the brilliant golden thread of our bond connecting my heart to his. And I could see, for the first time, faint silvery threads emanating from me as well, reaching out instinctively toward the strength and truth of him. "I saw him," I whispered, my voice trembling with the revelation. "Not just the man, his wolf, and the connections, the rot. He is part of it, Kaelen. He is one of the frayed threads. He asked me about your weaknesses." Kaelen went very still. The revelation that a council lord was conspiring against him was a blow far greater than a thief in the vault. This was betrayal at the highest level. He did not doubt me. The bond carried the truth of my vision, the purity of my shock. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the skin of my wrist, over the glowing mate mark. A crackle of energy, of both our inner wolves recognizing each other, passed between us. "You have the sight," he breathed, awe and dread mingling in his voice. "An omega gift lost to the ages. The wolves of old called it the weaver sight, the ability to see the bonds of loyalty and the knots of treachery within the pack." His gaze burned into mine. "This is your truth. The Omega's truth is not a weakness. It is a weapon they cannot comprehend." He closed his hand, not touching me, but fisting it at his side. "But it makes you a greater target. Theron knows you see more than you should. The game has changed again. They no longer just want you to frame you or use you against me." His voice dropped to a grave lupine rumble. "Now they will want you silenced permanently." The howl of a real wolf, lonely and defiant, echoed from the distant mountains, seeming to seep through the very stone of the spire. The wild was reminding us of what we were, not just king and captive, not just alpha and omega, but two wolves bound by fate, standing together in the heart of a gathering darkness. The enemy had a face now, and we had a secret they desperately needed to kill. The silence after Theron's visit was more threatening than any accusation. The castle settled into a false calm, a held breath. Kaelen moved with a new lethal quiet. The bond thrummed with the constant low-grade hum of his strategic mind at work, assessing threats, repositioning loyal guards, sending Roran on errands to distant garrisons with sealed orders. He did not visit me in the archives again, but his presence was a fortress around my senses. I could feel the deliberate wall of his focus shielding me, even as he moved through the viper's nest of his court. Our connection had deepened beyond emotion into a wordless, tactical awareness. I knew when he was in danger, not from a surge of fear, but from a sharpening of his instincts that felt like a blade being drawn in my own mind. My new sight, the Weaver sight, was a flickering, unreliable flame. It came in bursts, often when my own emotions ran high, a flash of shimmering connection between two guards sharing a true loyalty, a glimpse of a servant's aura, gray with quiet resentment. I learned to quiet my mind, to breathe through the stirring in my chest, to focus on the golden thread of my bond with Kaelen as an anchor. It was the one truth in a sea of shifting shadows. Then the summons came. Not from Kaelen, a different guard, one whose scent carried the faint cold echo of Lord Theron's cloves and mint, stood at my door. The king requests your presence in the Hall of Ancestors immediately. The bond gave no such confirmation. Instead, it pulsed with a sudden sharp query from Kaelen. "Where are you?" He felt my movement, my spike of alarm. This was a trap. But to refuse a royal summons, especially from a guard I could not prove was false, was an act of defiance, punishable by confinement or worse. I had to walk into the wolf's den to prove I was not its prey. "I will come," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The Hall of Ancestors was the sacred heart of the Iron Tooth legacy, vast, cold, lined with stone effigies of kings and heroes past, their lupine features frozen in perpetual snarls or howls. Torches guttered in iron sconces, casting dancing, monstrous shadows. It was empty, save for 3 figures. Kaelen stood before the effigy of his own father, his back to me, ramrod straight. To his right was Roran, a stoic statue of vigilance, and to his left, smiling thinly, was Lord Theron. "Ah, the Omega arrives," Theron's voice slithered through the cavernous space. "We were just discussing the instability caused by recent events. The unknown is a poison to a pack, my king. It breeds fear, and fear breeds dissent." Kaelen turned. His face was a mask of kingly impassivity, but his eyes met mine. In that glance, the bond conveyed volumes. Caution, play the part. I am here. "You summoned me, my king?" I asked, bowing my head, playing the meek Lowborn. "I did," Kaelen said, his voice echoing. "Lord Theron has raised a point of law, an ancient, seldom invoked edict from the time of the twin Alpha Wars." He paused, letting the name of that cursed prophecy hang in the air. The Edict of Clarification. It states that in times of internal threat, when the loyalty of any pack member, be they lowest omega or highest alpha, their inner wolf may be summoned forth, not to shift, but to bear witness before the pack. A wolf's essence cannot lie in the face of direct alpha command. My blood ran cold, summoned the inner wolf, to lay my spirit bare before them, before Theron. It was a profound, intimate violation. It is a safeguard, you see, Theron purred, to prove your inner nature is truly Omega, that there's no hidden contradiction within you, to quiet the whispers of witchcraft and secret power. Once your wolf confirms its submissive nature, the pack's doubts will be silenced, unless, of course, it confirms something else. The trap was exquisite. If I refused, I was guilty. If I complied, and my wolf, that newly stirring perceptive force, behaved in any way unexpected, I was condemned. They were using the pack's oldest laws to dissect the bond itself. Kaelen's fury was a silent inferno down the bond. He had been maneuvered. To deny the edict was to show unlawful favoritism. To allow it was to risk me. The law is clear, Kaelen stated, his gaze locked with Theron's. A battle of wills crackled between them. The summoning requires the Alpha King, the head Beta, and a council elder. We have the three. We will proceed now.
He stepped toward me, away from the effigies. His power, the full, unrestrained dominance of the Stormbringer, began to radiate from him in palpable waves. The air grew heavy, charged. Roran looked tense, his hand on his sword. Theron looked like a cat about to pounce. Talia of no pack. Kaelen's voice changed, dropping into a lower, resonant register that vibrated in my bones. It was the voice of command, the tone that spoke directly to the wolf within. By my authority as Alpha King, I compel the essence of your lycanthropus. Step forward, show us your truth. The command was an irresistible force. It hooked behind my breastbone and pulled. A gasp tore from my lips. The stirring in my chest exploded into a torrent. It was not a shift. My body remained my own, but my awareness, it fractured. I felt myself doubling, my human consciousness reeling as another presence surged to the fore, called forth by its alpha. I saw the hall through new eyes. The stone was not gray, but alive with the memories of 1,000 howls. The torches were not fire, but captured sunbeats. And the three men before me, I saw their wolves. Roran's was a sturdy, battle-scarred timber wolf, steadfast and loyal, standing firm beside his alpha. Theron's was the sleek, gray predator I had seen before, its muzzle wrinkled in a silent snarl, its eyes darting, calculating. And Kaelen's, his inner wolf was a breathtaking creature of power and storm, a giant, fur the color of a midnight sky shot with silver, eyes like captured lightning. It stared at my emerging essence, not with command, but with a fierce, protective intensity. And what emerged from me was not the small, submissive creature an Omega's wolf should be. It was a silvery, luminous form, more light than solid matter. It was slender, but not weak. Its eyes were not downcast, but wide and seeing, reflecting the entire hall, the stone, the fire, the three wolf essences before it. And from it, threads of gentle light spun outward, not in submission, but in perception. One brilliant golden thread connected it inextricably to Kaelen's storm wolf. Others fainter reached towards Roran's steadfast form. And when a thread of light brushed toward Theron's gray predator, it recoiled slightly, as if touching something unclean. A low murmur escaped Roran. Theron's smug expression vanished, replaced by stark, electrified shock. "By the first wolf,"
Roran breathed. "It is a weaver. The legends are true." "It is an abomination," Theron spat, finding his voice. "An Omega wolf that does not bow, that looks, this is no true Omega spirit. This is the contradiction the edict seeks to reveal. This proves the bond is a perversion of the natural order." My silver wolf essence, hearing the malice in his voice, did not cower. It took a subtle step forward, placing its insubstantial form slightly between Theron's wolf and Kaelen's. A soft, soundless growl resonated in the shared spiritual space, not of threat, but of warning, of protection. The moment stretched, eternal and fragile. Kaelen looked from my luminous wolf essence to Theron's livid face. The law had been satisfied. My wolf had been revealed, and it had not shown submission. It had shown something far more dangerous, far more ancient. Kaelen's own storm wolf slowly bowed its massive head, not in dominance, but in a profound acknowledging respect to my silver form. Then the king broke the connection. The world slammed back into focus. I staggered, my knees buckling. Kaelen was there in an instant, his hand gripping my arm to steady me, his touch sending a shock of warmth and stability through the bond. His face was etched with a tumultuous mix of triumph and dread. "The edict is complete," Kaelen announced, his voice thunderous with finality. "The Omega's inner nature is confirmed. It is not of submission, but of sight, a gift of the old blood, long forgotten. There is no contradiction, only a truth our age has failed to remember." He turned his blazing gaze on Theron. "The whispers are now silenced by ancient law. Anyone who speaks against this finding speaks against the testimony of the wolves themselves and against their king." It was a masterful stroke. He had used Theron's own trap to legitimize me, to twist the ancient law into a shield. But the cost was plain. My secret was now a witnessed fact. I was no longer just a mysterious lowborn. I was a weaver, a living relic of a dangerous, forgotten power. Theron bowed, his face a mask of fury barely contained. "As my king wills." He shot me one last glittering look, a look that no longer held mere political dislike, but the pure, undiluted hatred of a predator it now fully recognized. As he swept from the hall, the trap he had laid lay sprung, but it had caught a different beast than he intended. The battle lines were no longer hidden. They were drawn in the stark spiritual light of two wolves, one of storm and one of silver sight, standing together in a hall of stone kings. The war for the soul of the kingdom had just begun, and my wolf, the wolf I never knew I had just howled its first silent challenge into the dark. The truth, once unleashed, could not be caged again. Word of the edict of clarification, of the silvery weaver wolf that had stood its ground, spread through the castle like wildfire in dry grass. Whispers ceased to be whispers. They became open debate, fractures in the stone of tradition. I was no longer a ghost in the north spire. I was a specter haunting every corridor. Kaelen's solution was to bring the specter into the light. My imprisonment became a different kind of confinement, an unspoken protection within the orbit of his own authority. I was given a small, airy chamber in the royal wing, adjacent to his own quarters. It had a window that overlooked the inner training yards, not the wild mountains. A gilded cage, but a cage nonetheless, now shared with the most dangerous wolf in the realm. He did not speak of what happened in the Hall of Ancestors. The bond hummed with the unspoken weight of it. His storm wolf's respectful bow to mine was a memory etched in our shared spirit. But in the waking world, he was a king navigating a sudden precipice. "You will learn our ways," he declared one morning, his tone leaving no room for protest. Not as an Omega servant, but as a student of the court. If you are to be a target, you must understand the battlefield. Thus began my uneasy education. Roran, his loyalty tested and proven in the hall, became my reluctant tutor. He taught me the complex heraldry of the rival mountain packs, the Sunfang with their blazing crests, the Stone Howlers with their runic shields. He explained the fragile trade agreements, the history of border skirmishes, the deep-seated grievances that were the bedrock of Kaelen's rule. The king's strength has always been that he is a rock, Roran grunted, pointing to a map scarred with boundary lines.
The king's strength has always been that he is a rock, Roran grunted, pointing to a map scarred with boundary lines. Unmoving, unyielding, predictable in his power. This bond, your gift, it makes him seem unpredictable. To the enemy, that is a weakness to exploit. To his own people, it is a terrifying unknown. I listened, absorbing it all. The politics were a foreign language, but the underlying currents of fear and power were what my weaver sight instinctively understood. I began to see the court not as individuals, but as a shimmering, tangled web of connections. Loyalties shone like bright threads, ambitions pulsed like dark knots, and Lord Theron, his place in the web was becoming a void, a place where threads were severed or turned sickly and pale. My presence in the royal wing did not go unnoticed. The first overt challenge came at the weekly court feast. I was seated at the high table, not beside Kaelen, but at a lower annex, a place for honored yet peripheral guests. The hall buzzed with forced merriment and the clatter of plates. The air was thick with the scent of roast meat, spiced wine, and simmering tension. Lord Theron rose from his seat among the high nobles, holding a goblet. "A toast," he called, his voice cutting through the noise, "to our king, and to the new light that has come to our court. May it illuminate only truth, and not cast inconvenient shadows." It was a toast laced with arsenic. The hall fell quiet. All eyes swung to me, a hunched figure in a simple, borrowed dress amidst a sea of silks and furs. Kaelen's hand tightened around his own goblet. I could feel his wolf's growl through the bond. But before he could speak, a new voice rang out. "I will drink to that, uncle." A young man stood up from the other side of the high table. He had Kaelen's dark hair, but his eyes were a warmer hazel, and his build was leaner, more like a runner than a brawler. He wore the insignia of a royal scout. This, I knew from Roran's lessons, was Kaelen's younger brother, Prince Kaelen. "For too long this court has been shrouded in the same old shadows," Prince Kaelen continued, his voice clear and bold. He raised his cup toward me, a genuine, curious smile on his face. "A new perspective, especially one gifted by the moon herself, can only be a blessing. It might show us enemies we've been too blind to see, and allies we've been too proud to acknowledge." The gasp in the hall was audible. This was not just support, it was a direct public rebuke of Theron's faction, and from the king's own blood. Theron's face tightened, but he bowed his head, swallowing the insult with his wine. Kaelen looked at his brother, a storm of unreadable emotion in his eyes, surprise, caution, a flicker of hope. The bond told me he had not orchestrated this. Kaelen had acted on his own. After the feast, as I was escorted back to my chamber, a figure slipped from an alcove. Prince Kaelen. He moved with a scout silence. "Lady Talia," he said, his tone respectful, "my brother's walls are high, and he trusts slowly. But I am not my brother. I look at you, and I do not see a threat or a weakness. I see a key."
He glanced down the empty corridor, his voice dropping. "The rot Theron speaks of, it is real, but it is not you. It is a sickness of ambition that has festered for years. My brother fights it with strength and law, but some sicknesses," he met my eyes, his gaze intent, "require a different kind of healing, perhaps a seeing." He placed a small rolled parchment in my hand. "Names," he whispered, "of those in the castle who are loyal not to tradition but to the future, who see the old blood not as a curse but a return to our true strength. You are not alone." Then he was gone, melting back into the shadows. Back in my chamber, unrolling the parchment by candlelight, I saw a list of 5 names: a stable master, a captain of the Eastern Guard, an elderly archivist, a healer, and Ilara, the silent maid. A spark of hope, fragile and dangerous, ignited in my chest, but the weaver sight, rising unbidden, cast a faint silvery glow over the list. Around 4 of the names, I felt a gentle, steady pulse of truth, but around the 5th, the captain of the Eastern Guard, the light wavered, and a faint, discordant echo, reminiscent of Theron's clove mask's scent, brushed against my senses. Prince Kaelen had given me a key, but he might also, unwittingly, handed me a test of my gift, a test of who to trust. I extinguished the candle, lying in the dark. The bond hummed with Kaelen's distant, vigilant presence. His brother had thrown a stone into the still pond of his rule. The ripples were spreading. I had allies in the shadows and a traitor possibly hiding on a list of friends. The chessboard had just gained new pieces, and for the first time I held a few of them in my own hand. The next move, I knew, would have to be mine. The list of names was a secret fire in my mind, warming me with possibility and scorching me with doubt. I carried it through the days of my new strange life in the royal wing, a days of quiet study, observed meals, and the constant silent pressure of the court's gaze. I used my weaver sight cautiously, like a thief testing a lock. In the bustling great hall during morning audiences, I would let my focus soften. The shimmering web of connections would flare into view. I saw the bright, thick cord tying Kaelen to Roran. I saw the delicate, hopeful threads spun from Prince Kaelen toward various young soldiers and scouts. And I saw the dark, sucking knots surrounding Lord Theron, with tendrils reaching out to coerce or corrupt. I sought out the names on the list, one by one, under pretexts woven from half-truths. The stablemaster, Boren, was a mountain of a man with gentle hands for frightened horses. When I approached, asking after a gentle mare for riding lessons, his aura bloomed with a steady, earthy warmth. His loyalty was to the land and the beasts upon it, and by extension, to the king who protected it. No discord there. The elderly archivist, Mistress Lyra, who had secretly allowed Prince Kaelen access to the forbidden texts, when I brought her a crumbling scroll for translation, her eyes milky with age, saw more than the page. Her connection to the past was a pure silver thread. Her loyalty was to truth itself, not to any present power. She was safe. The healer, Anya, had kind eyes and fingers that could suture a wound or soothe a fever. When I feigned a headache, her touch was cool, her aura a calming blue-green stream of compassion. Her thread led directly to the heart of the castle's people, not its politics.
When I feigned a headache, her touch was cool, her aura a calming blue-green stream of compassion. Her thread led directly to the heart of the castle's people, not its politics. Then there was the captain of the Eastern Guard, Varn. He was a model soldier, broad-shouldered, clean-shaven, with a voice that barked crisp orders on the training field. I watched him from my window, drilling his men. When I ventured to the edge of the yard one afternoon, under Roran's watchful eye, I focused my fledgling sight on him. His aura was disciplined, a tight, controlled shell of amber light. But when a young soldier stumbled and Varn's shout lashed out with a venom that seemed excessive, I saw it, a flicker, a hairline crack in the amber through which seeped a thin gray wisp of resentment. It was the same dissonant echo I'd felt from the parchment. The scent wasn't cloves, but it shared the same hidden bitterness. He was the flaw in Prince Kaelen's list, a man whose loyalty was to order and rank, not to the soul of the pack. A man who could be twisted by promises of greater rank, greater order, under a different ruler. The most delicate meeting was with Ilara. She came to my new chamber to tend the fire. As she knelt, arranging the logs, I spoke softly. The north spire was very cold, but your shawl was a kindness I have not forgotten. Her hand stilled. She did not look up. The prince believes there are those who still remember the old songs, I ventured further, my heart hammering. The songs of the weavers, the songs of unity, not division. Slowly, Ilara lifted her head. Her weathered face was a map of quiet sorrow and enduring strength. Her eyes, those deep pools, held mine. For the first time, I didn't just see an old maid. I saw the ghostly outline of her inner wolf, an ancient gray she-wolf, one ear torn, her gaze weary but unbroken. "The old songs are dangerous, child," she whispered, her voice the rasp of autumn leaves. "They speak of a time when the pack was one heart, one breath, before the alphas hoarded power and called it strength, before the omegas were broken and called it peace." She glanced toward the door, then back, her voice dropping even lower. "The prince has a good heart. He dreams of healing, but dreams are easily poisoned. There is a wolf among his new friends whose howl is not true. You must tell him." My breath caught. She knew. She had the sight, too, in her own way, earned through decades of silent observation. "Varn," I breathed. A faint, sad nod. "Ambition is a slow sickness. It eats a wolf from the inside until only a hollow shell remains, waiting to be filled by another's will." She placed the last log on the fire. "The king, he fights with a sword, but this enemy fights with a whisper. You must learn to hear it." She left then, leaving behind not just warmth from the fire, but the warmth of confirmation. I had an ally in the most forgotten corner of the castle, and I had a truth to deliver. Finding Prince Kaelen alone was a challenge. He was always moving, always surrounded. Finally, I caught him in the portrait gallery, studying a painting of his mother, the same gentle Omega Queen whose memory haunted Kaelen. "My prince," I said, dipping into a curtsy. "Talia," he said, turning with his ready smile, "come to admire the one person in this family who wasn't carved from granite?" "I come with a warning," I dispensed with courtesy. The bond tingled. Kaelen was nearby, perhaps sensing my urgency. "Your list, your trust is a gift, but one of the names, its thread is frayed." His face vanished. "Who?" "Captain Varn. His loyalty is to the idea of power, not to your brother's heart. He resents. That resentment is a door, and our enemies are experts at opening doors." Kaelen's face fell, not in disbelief, but in pained acceptance. "Varn, he served with me on the eastern patrols. He always spoke of efficiency, of stronger rule. I thought he meant a stronger defense." He ran a hand through his hair, the image of his carefree toast gone. "Are you certain?" he asked. "As certain as my sight allows," I said. "He is the crack in your shield, my prince." He stared at the portrait of his mother for a long moment. "My brother would have him arrested, questioned, possibly executed on suspicion. That would confirm every fear Theron's faction spreads, that the king is ruled by paranoia and my connection." Kaelen nodded slowly, a strategist's light entering his hazel eyes. Then we do not close the door. We watch it. We see who tries to walk through. He looked at me, a new respect in his gaze. You have a warrior's mind, Lady Talia, not for the battlefield, but for the war behind the walls. Just then, Kaelen entered the gallery. He took in the scene, his brother and I in tense conference, and his expression darkened. The bond flooded with a possessive, protective spike. "Brother," Kaelen said, his mask back in place, "I was just thanking Lady Talia for her insights into the eastern border logistics. She has a keen eye for weaknesses in our formations." Kaelen's gaze bored at me, questioning, searching. I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Trust him, trust this. He held my look for a heartbeat that stretched into an age. Then he gave a curt nod of his own. "See that the captain of the guard is informed of these weaknesses," he said to Kaelen, his voice layered with double meaning. "He should be vigilant." As Kaelen left, Kaelen stepped closer to me, his presence a wall of heat and simmering intensity. "You walk a razor's edge," he murmured, his voice for my ears alone, "conspiring with my brother, judging my captains." "I am learning the battlefield, my king," I replied, meeting his stormy eyes, "and I am finding the enemy's spies, not with a sword, but with a whisper." He was so close I could see the flecks of gray in his blue irises, feel the controlled power radiating from him. The bond sang, a taut golden string plucked by our proximity. He did not touch me, but in that moment, in the gallery of granite-faced kings and one gentle queen, our alliance felt more intimate, more dangerous than any touch could ever be. We had turned a potential traitor into a beacon. Now we had to wait and see what moths it would draw from the darkness. The waiting was a form of torture, a slow drip of tension in the veins of the castle. Kaelen's presence became a constant brooding storm at the edge of my awareness. He no longer kept his distance. He was a shadow in my doorway, a silent figure observing my studies, his gaze a physical weight that stirred both the bond and the newly awakened wolf sense within me.
It was a dark, possessive attention, not of a lover, but of an alpha safeguarding a vital, dangerous asset. And something more, something that hummed with a predatory fascination he could not fully master. The Weaver sight grew stronger, more intrusive. I began to perceive not just the connections between wolves, but the echoes of their primal selves in the human world. A guard's lingering stare held the yellow glint of a wolf on patrol. A servant's hurried step carried the skittish energy of a prey animal. And Kaelen, when his control slipped, I didn't just feel his anger. I saw the ghost of his massive, storm-pelted wolf overlay his form, its lips pulled back from spectral teeth. It was during the Howling Moon ceremony, a monthly ritual where the pack's alphas reaffirmed their bonds under the naked sky, that the darkness of our connection truly surfaced. The ceremony was held in the castle's inner bailey, torchlit and throbbing with raw, untamed energy. Omegas and betas were not permitted. They observed from the high balconies. But I was there, on Kaelen's orders, standing in the shadows of an arched gateway, Roran, a solid, disapproving presence beside me. "He wants you to see the power you're entwined with," Roran muttered, "or the danger you court." The alphas, including Kaelen, Theron, and others of the high blood, stood in a circle, bare-chested, despite the cold. They were not shifted, but their inner wolves rode their skins so close the air shimmered with barely contained force. The chant rose, a deep, vibrating call that bypassed the ear and spoke directly to the spine. Kaelen was the epicenter. He threw his head back, and a howl tore from his throat, a sound of such pure, brutal sovereignty it made my knees weak. It was not a sound a human mouth should make. It was the voice of the Stormbringer's wolf, king of all wolves on this mountain. And it called to mine. The silvery essence within me, the weaver wolf, did not howl in answer. It stirred. A piercing, sympathetic agony lanced through me, a desire to answer that call, to step into the circle, to let my own strange light shine beside his consuming dark. I clutched the stone archway, a whimper escaping my lips. The bond was a searing brand, pulling me toward him with a force that felt like my soul was being unraveled. Kaelen's head snapped toward the shadows where I stood, his howl cut off. In the torchlight, his eyes found mine. They were pure, blazing gold, not a flicker of blue. The man was gone, and the alpha wolf stared out, seeing not the lowborn Omega, but the luminous, trembling spirit bound to him by the moon's own will. His gaze was a possessive claim, a dark promise, and a terrifying question all at once. The other alphas followed his stare. Theron's expression was one of naked revulsion. The ancient chant faltered, the sacred circle broken by the king's distraction, by my presence. The moment shattered. Kaelen blinked, the gold receding like a tide, leaving his face a mask of stark, wild conflict. He had lost control in front of his entire pack, because of me. Afterwards, in the stark silence of his private council chamber, he confronted me. The room smelled of him, of cold stone, iron, and the wild electric scent of his recent near shift. "What did you do?" His voice was low, ragged, stripped of his kingly cadence. He paced like a caged beast, the animal energy still rolling off him in waves. "I didn't mean to!" The words burst from me, fueled by equal parts fear and a strange, exhilarated shame. "Your howl, it called to the wolf in me. The bond, it's not just a thread anymore, Kaelen. It's a river, and your power is the storm that swells it." He stopped pacing, suddenly directly in front of me, too close. The heat of his barely contained shift warmed the air between us. I could see the rapid pulse at the base of his throat. His hand came up, not to strike, but to hover beside my face, his fingers curled as if around the phantom fur of my silvery wolf. "I looked at you," he breathed, his gold-flecked eyes tracing the line of my jaw, the curve of my neck. "I did not see a pawn or a prophet. I saw a claim. My wolf saw its mate. And in that moment, the king, the crown, the kingdom, they were smoke." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "That is a weakness no enemy's blade could ever replicate. That is a treason against my own vow to this pack." His confession was a dark, seductive poison. It spoke of a ruinous passion that terrified him as much as it called to him. This was the dark heart of the romance fate had woven for us. Not sweet whispers, but a primal recognition that threatened to burn down the world he'd built. "Is it weakness?" I whispered, daring to hold his turbulent gaze. "Or is it a different kind of strength? You rule through fear and force. What if the bond, what if this is the moon's way of giving you something else? An anchor that is not submissive, but equal in its truth?" He flinched as if I struck him. Equal? A lowborn Omega Weaver and an Alpha King? The world does not work that way, Talia. The world breaks things that try to be that way. His hovering hand finally made contact, but not on my skin. His knuckles brushed against the fabric over my collarbone, where my own pulse hammered, a gesture of devastating, restrained intensity. "It would break you, and I would have to watch." The threat was a caress. The protection was a prison. The love, unspoken and terrifying, was a war declaration. A sharp knock at the door broke the spell. Roran entered, his face grave. "My king, a report from the Eastern Watchtower. Captain Varn has just sent a rider. He claims to have intercepted a Fangs scout carrying a message.
Roran's eyes flicked to me. That mentions the silvery seer in the Stormbringer's court. They know her, sire, and they are interested. The outside world crashed in. Our dark, intimate struggle was no longer just ours. The enemy beyond the walls now had a name for me. The secret was out. Kaelen's hand dropped. The Alpha King slammed back into place, his face hardening into a mask of lethal calm. But in the bond, I felt the raw, ferocious protectiveness that surged forth, a wolf ready to tear the throat of any who looked at its mate. "The crack in the shield," I said softly, recalling my words to Kaelen. "They looked through it. Varn has made his move." Kaelen's smile was a cold, sharp thing. "Good. Now we know which door to guard." He looked from Roran to me, his decision made in the space of a heartbeat. "Prepare to ride at first light."
Not for the eastern border. We ride west to the Moonstone Falls. It is neutral, sacred ground. If the Sun Fang wishes to speak of what is mine, they will do so where the old magic still holds sway, and they will do so looking at the barrel of my spears. He was using me as bait, as a symbol, the ultimate dangerous gambit. The silvery seer would be unveiled not in the shadows, but under the open sky, between two rival powers. As he strode out to give his commands, the dark romance of our bond twisted into a new, perilous shape. We were no longer just king and captive, Alpha and Omega circling each other in stone halls. We were becoming a single, twofold weapon. His storm, my sight, pointed at the heart of a coming war. And the first test would be at the sacred falls, where the water roared and the oldest magics whispered of bonds that could either save kingdoms or drown them in blood. Dawn was a bloodless gray smear as we rode out. The iron-toothed castle shrank behind us, a grim fist of stone against the lighter sky. Our party was small, lethal. Kaelen at its head, a figure of grim purpose carved from shadow and steel. Roran at his flank, a dozen of the king's personal guard, their loyalty a solid amber glow in my weaver sight, and me, swathed in a dark hooded cloak, mounted on a steady gelding. Kaelen had not looked at me since issuing the command. The bond was a coiled spring, taut with his focus and a simmering protective rage. He was leading his mate into a den of rivals. The primal part of him, the wolf that had howled its claim, saw this as the deepest violation. The king saw it as the only move left. We rode hard, eating up the leagues of pine forest and rocky scree that formed the kingdom's spine. The air grew colder, cleaner, sharp with the scent of ice and stone. The Moonstone Falls lay in a high hidden valley, a place claimed by no single pack, where the roar of water drowned out all but the most ancient magics. As we neared the valley mouth, Kaelen dropped back, reining his massive black stallion beside my gelding. His eyes, still human blue but holding the storm's potential, scanned my face within the hood. "You will not speak unless I permit it. You will not meet his gaze unless I direct you. Your power is in your silence, in your unseen sight. Do you understand?" It was an Alpha's command, but beneath it the bond thrummed with a different plea. "Stay safe. Do not give them a reason to touch you." "I understand," I murmured. "See everything," he added, his voice dropping even lower, a husky rasp that was for me alone. "Your truth is our weapon now. Wield it from the shadows." We entered the valley. The sound was the first assault, a deep, thunderous roar that vibrated in the chest. Then, the sight, a colossal curtain of white water plunging from a sheer cliff into a churning, mist-wreathed pool below. Rainbows danced in the perpetual spray. The very air tasted of power and shattered light.
On the far side of the broad rocky shore, they were already waiting. The Sunfang lived up to their name. Where Kaelen's wolves wore shades of gray, black, and iron, these warriors were adorned in burnished bronze and gold. Their cloaks were brilliant saffron and crimson. At their head stood Solar. He was Kaelen's opposite. Where Kaelen was all contained winter storm, Solar was open, blazing arrogance. He was taller, broader, his hair a mane of sun-bleached gold, his eyes a piercing tawny yellow, even in his human form. He wore no shirt despite the cold, displaying a torso mapped with old scars and sun-darkened skin. His smile was a flash of white in a trimmed beard. "Stormbringer," Solar's voice boomed, easily carrying over the waterfall's roar. He spread his arms, a gesture of mocking welcome. "You bring your shadows to my sunlight. And what is this?" His predatory gaze swept over our party, landing unerringly on my hooded form. "A little shadow you keep close? How unlike you!" Kaelen dismounted, his movements fluid and deliberate. The rest of us followed suit. "This is neutral ground, Solar. You requested a parley regarding matters of interest. Speak. The sun moves, and so does my patience." Solar chuckled, a low rumbling sound. "Still all frost and sharp edges, I see?" He took a few steps forward, his own men shifting behind him. I let my weaver sight rise, careful, controlled. The world shifted. Solar's aura was a blazing, almost painful corona of orange gold, powerful, egotistical, but surprisingly straightforward. The threads connecting him to his warriors were thick, bright, and simple. Loyalty born of shared strength, of conquest. There was no subtle sickness here, no hidden knots like Theron's. This was a different kind of danger, a pure, uncomplicated predator. But then my sight snagged on a figure half hidden behind Solar's right shoulder, a lean, sharp-faced man with eyes the color of tarnished copper. His aura was muted, muddy brown, and from him a single dark squirming thread snaked back, not towards the Sunfang lands, but east, back towards the mountains of the Iron Tooth, towards a specific familiar knot of ambition. Theron. My breath hitched. Kaelen felt it, a slight tensing in his shoulders. "My scout carried an interesting tale," Solar was saying, his eyes glued to Kaelen, enjoying himself. "Of a new power in your stone nest, a seer, a weaver of the old blood. Such a thing would be a treasure beyond price, a weapon to see an enemy's heart before he draws his blade." He took another step, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl. "I propose a trade, Stormbringer, an alliance sealed in the old way. You give me the silvery seer, I give you my armies at your back when the rot in your own court finally forces the knife into it." The air went dead, save for the waterfall's endless scream. Roran's hand went to his sword. Kaelen did not move a muscle, but the temperature around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. The bond flooded with a rage so cold, so absolute, it was like being filled with glacial ice.
"You mistake what you see," Kaelen said, his voice so quiet it was more terrifying than a shout. "She is not a commodity. She is under the protection of the Iron Tooth. A threat to her is a declaration of war upon me. Is that the trade you wish to make, Sunlord? War?" Solar's smile didn't falter, but his eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected the depth of the rejection. He glanced again at my hooded form, reassessing. Protection or possession? The whispers say she is your fated, that the bond has addled your famous judgment, that you keep a low-born witch as a pet and call it destiny. It was the opening, the provocation. I could feel Kaelen's wolf rising, a tsunami of fury held back by a thread of kingly will. He would take the bait, he would fight, and this sacred place would become a slaughter ground. Acting on an instinct deeper than command, I stepped forward. A gasp went through both groups. I pushed back my hood, letting the mist dampen my hair, letting them all see my face. Not a witch, not a queen, just a young woman with eyes that now held a faint, unsettling silver sheen in the waterfall's light. I did not look at Salar. I looked at the sharp-faced man behind him, my gaze locking on to his tarnished copper eyes. I let my weaver sight shine through my own, aiming it like a lance. "You bring a poisoned gift, Sun Lord," I said, my voice clear and carried strangely by the mist. I pointed at the sharp-faced man. "This one's loyalty is not to your son. It is to a shadow in my own home. He carries messages from a wolf named Theron. He is the crack in your shield, not mine. He offers you a seer, while his true master plans to take your armies and your throne once the Stormbringer is fallen." The effect was instantaneous. The sharp-faced man's eyes widened in pure panic. Salar's triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a flash of bewildered fury. He spun, backhanding the man so hard he crumpled to the stones. Chaos erupted among the Sunfang. Salar roared, turning back to Kaelen, his face a mask of betrayed rage. "You plant spies in my camp?" "I expose the spies in both our camps," Kaelen countered, his voice thunderous with vindication. He hadn't known, but he played the moment with flawless authority. "The enemy is not between our kingdoms, Salar. It is within them. It seeks to use your strength and my distraction to burn us both." Salar stood, chest heaving, looking from the cowering spy to me, to Kaelen. The calculus of power had just been upended. I had not just defended myself, I had exposed a treason in his own ranks, offered him a common enemy. The dark, possessive tension in the bond shifted, melting into a fierce, triumphant pride. Kaelen looked at me, and for a heartbeat, the king was gone. There was only the alpha, looking at his mate who had just faced down a rival pack and won without a single blow being struck. The game had changed again. We were no longer just bait and protector. We were a united front. And we had just turned a potential enemy into a temporarily shocked and very interested ally. The real war, we both knew now as our gazes held over the roaring falls, was waiting for us back home, and its name was Theron. We returned to the Iron Tooth, not as a king and his captive, nor as a hunter and his bait. We returned as a single chilling truth. The silence that greeted us within the castle walls was thicker than any cheer. It was the silence of a storm gathering its final, terrible breath. Word, carried on wings swifter than ravens, had flown ahead. The court knew of the parley. They knew the Lowborn Omega had stood before the Sunfang Alpha and spoken. They knew she had unmasked a traitor with a glance. The tale grew in the telling, of course. Some said my eyes had flashed pure silver, turning the spy to stone. Others whispered I had spoken in the tongue of the first wolves, and the waterfall itself had stilled to hear me. I saw the new looks in the corridors. The fear had not left, oh no, but it had been joined by something else, a wary, superstitious awe. I was no longer just a problem, I was an omen. Kaelen felt it too. The bond thrummed with a new relentless tension. The dark, possessive edge had sharpened, honed by the public display of my power and the very real danger I had faced. He did not confine me to the royal wing. Instead, he drew me closer like a sword kept at hand. I attended his private councils now, a silent, silver-eyed shadow at his shoulder. Roran's initial disapproval had calcified into a grim acceptance.
I was a weapon in his king's arsenal, however strange. It was in one such council, as dusk stained the sky the color of a fresh bruise, that the final piece of Theron's design was laid bare. We were in the war room, a place of maps and grim trophies. Kaelen, Heroine, and a few trusted generals pored over reports of troop movements. Theron's allies were consolidating in the eastern reaches under the command of the treacherous Captain Varn. He moves to secure the granaries and the forges, a grizzled general named Haldor growled, jabbing a thick finger at the map. He does not march on the castle, he strangles it. Kaelen's face was granite. Then we cut the head from the serpent. We ride for Theron's manor, tonight. It was then that a young page, his face pale as milk, scurried in and whispered frantically into Heroine's ear. The beta's own face drained of color. He turned to Kaelen, his voice grave. My king, a development in the lower dungeons. The prisoner, the Fangs spy we took at the falls. He is dead. A cold knot formed in my stomach. How? Kaelen's word was a shard of ice. Wolfsbane, the same as old Goran, the vault keeper, but the guard on duty swears no one entered. The only soul who visited the cells today was the castle healer, to tend to a cook's burned hand. Anya, the name echoed in the silent, terrible chamber. The healer with the kind eyes and the calming blue-green aura, the one from Prince Kaelen's list, whose loyalty had seemed so pure. My weaver sight flared in panic, unbidden. I saw not the room, but the web. I saw the bright, fraying thread of Prince Kaelen's hope. I saw the dark, complex knot of Theron's ambition. And I saw, with a clarity that lanced me like physical pain, a thin, almost invisible filament of perfect, healing green that ran from the memory of Anya's gentle touch straight into the heart of the dark knot. She had not been coerced. She had been woven into the plot from the very beginning. Her compassion was her mask, her access, her weapon.
Anya, I gasped, the word tearing from me. All eyes snapped to me. She is not just a healer. She is the poisoner. Her thread, it is tied to Theron. She has been his creature all along. The horror in the room was palpable. The healer was the most trusted soul in a castle, tending to young and old, to Alpha and Omega alike. Her betrayal was a violation of the pack's very soul. Kaelen's rage was a silent, cataclysmic event. The maps on the table trembled, the torches guttered. His eyes, when he looked at me, held a devastation that went beyond fury. You saw her. You spoke with her. You told me she was safe. The accusation in his voice was not of deceit, but of fallibility. My gift had failed. My sight had been blinded by the appearance of kindness. The weight of it crushed me. I saw only the surface, I stammered, shame a hot tide in my throat. Her deception was too deep, too still. I failed you. For a long, terrible moment, he just stared at me, the bond a tempest of betrayal, fear, and a crushing disappointment. In that look, I saw the king who had gambled everything on a strange Omega's sight, and had found it wanting. Then he turned away, the moment broken. The king was back, his voice cold and decisive. Arrest the healer, now. Use chains of cold iron. Let no one else near her. He turned his gaze to the map, to the symbol of Theron's manor, and prepare to ride. The serpent has shown its fangs within our very heart. We crush its head before its venom stops our own. As the men scrambled to obey, the room emptied, leaving me standing alone in the flickering torchlight of the war room. The bond was a hollow, aching thing. The triumph of the falls was ashes. I had been so proud of my sight, so sure of my growing power, and in my arrogance I had missed the rot festering right beside me.
A soft footfall sounded at the door. Prince Kaelen stood there, his usual vibrant energy subdued. He had heard. His face was etched with a pain that mirrored my own. His trust, his dream of a better future, had been poisoned by the very person meant to heal. "He will not say it," Kaelen said softly, leaning against the doorframe. "But his anger is not at you, Talia. It is at himself, for trusting, for hoping, for believing that a bond of the heart could be stronger than the rot of ambition." He gave a sad, hollow laugh. "My brother has spent his life building walls. You made him believe for a moment he could have a window. Now he believes the window only showed the enemy how to get in." He pushed off the frame and walked away, leaving me with a truth more desolate than any accusation. I walked slowly back to my chamber, the castle feeling like a tomb. Ilara was there, stoking the fire. She took one look at my face, and her old eyes filled with a deep, knowing sorrow. "The healer was a good liar," she said simply, her voice like dry stone. "The best liars believe their own tales. They weave their falsehood so deep they look like truth even to those who can see threads." She placed a gnarled hand on my arm. "Do not let his doubt become your own, child. The wolf that doubts its own nose in a trap is the wolf that dies." But as I lay in the dark, the bond a cold, distant thread, Ilara's wisdom felt small. The enemy was not just at the gates or in the eastern hills. He was in our medicine, in our trust, in the very stories we told ourselves about loyalty. And I, the silvery seer, the weaver of truth, had been blind. The king rode out that night into the howling dark, not with a symbol of hope at his side, but alone, to face the monster he should have slain long ago. And I was left in the stone silence of the castle, with nothing but my flawed sight and a single terrifying question. When he returned, would he see the Omega who helped him, or the weakness that had nearly cost him his kingdom?
A resolve, fragile but steely, began to form in the ashes of my doubt. She was right. Waiting, cowering in my chamber, doubting my own senses, that was the true failure. I began to walk the castle, not as a curiosity or a prisoner, but as a silent presence. I visited the kitchens, not to eat, but to stand quietly, letting my weaver's sight gently expand. I saw the cook's worry for her son in the eastern guard. I saw a young scullery maid's thread of pure, bright love for a stable boy. I did not speak grand words. I simply witnessed, and in witnessing I offered a silent acknowledgement of their humanity, their fears, their loves. I went to the barracks where the remaining guards, those too young or too old to ride with the king, drilled with restless energy. I stood at the edge of the training yard. Roran moved to intercept me, but I held up a hand. I focused my sight on the men. I saw not soldiers, but a tangled web of anxiety, loyalty to a distant king, and a gnawing fear of the unknown. One young guard, his movements clumsy with nervousness, fumbled his spear. His sergeant barked a harsh reprimand, the thread between them snapping with tension. On impulse, I stepped forward. My voice, when it came, was clear and carried across the yard. "He does not fear the enemy, Sergeant. He fears failing the king who is not here to see him succeed." The yard fell silent. All eyes turned to me. The young guard stared, his face pale. The sergeant scowled, but the truth of my words, a truth pulled not from his mind, but from the shimmering, anxious thread between them, struck home. "The king fights for the stones of this castle," I continued, looking from face to face, letting my silvered gaze meet theirs. "But what is a castle without the spirit of the pack within it? Your steadiness here, your vigilance, is the thread that holds this place together while he is gone. Do not let doubt fray it." I did not command, I did not prophesy, I simply named the fear they all felt, and in naming it, gave it less power.
I saw it in the weaver sight. The harsh, snapping thread between the sergeant and the guard softened, not to weakness, but to a determined understanding. Other threads in the yard, formerly frayed and tense, seemed to pull a little tighter, to glow a little brighter. It was a small thing, a whisper against the gale, but I repeated it in the weaving rooms, where women worked with nervous hands, in the nursery, where Omega mothers clutched their pups close. I did not promise victory. I did not pretend to have Kaelen's strength. I simply used my sight to see their fear and my voice to acknowledge their courage in enduring it. I was mending, not with needle and thread, but with attention and truth. On the third night, as a sleet-laden wind clawed at the shutters, the bond suddenly jerked. A wave of intense, focused fury, Kaelen's, flooded through me, followed by a spike of triumphant satisfaction. Then a complex surge of grief, resolve, and weary, bloody victory. It was over. The fight at Theron's manor was done. The news arrived with the first ragged riders just before dawn. They were mud-spattered, bloodied, but their eyes held a fierce light. Roran met them in the great hall, and I stood on the stairs, unseen in the shadows. "The traitor is dead," a lieutenant reported, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and pride. "The king fought like a cornered beast, but the king was like the first wolf himself. He took Theron's head on the steps of his own ancestral hall." A murmur of grim satisfaction rippled through those gathered. "And the king?" asked Roran, his voice tight. "Wounded, a blade to the side, but he stands. He is breaking Theron's remaining forces and will return within 2 days." The lieutenant paused, his gaze scanning the hall. "He sent a message for the lady, Talia." Every eye in the hall lifted to the shadows where I stood. I stepped forward, my heart a wild bird in my chest. The lieutenant swallowed, then spoke the words exactly as given. "The king said to tell you, the serpent's head is removed, but the poison may yet linger in the body. Watch for it." And the man hesitated, then spoke the words exactly as given. "The window was worth the risk." A silent shockwave passed through the room. The window was worth the risk. My breath caught. He was not shutting me out in his anger. He was acknowledging the vulnerability, the danger my presence brought, and declaring it a price he would pay again. I simply nodded, my throat too tight for words. As I turned to go, I let my weaver sight sweep the hall one last time. The threads of the pack were different, still strained, still fearful, but the paralyzing terror was gone. In its place was a weary, determined cohesion, strengthened by the news of their king's victory, and subtly, imperceptibly, braced by the quiet, mending presence of a silvery seer who had chosen to stand with them, not above them. The king was returning victorious, but the castle he would return to was not the same one he had left. It was a place where the Omega in the tower had, in her own small way, begun to learn how to be a weaver, not just of sight, but of strength. He returned at the head of a column of mud and bloodied steel, under a sky the color of tarnished silver. The castle gates groaned open, not in triumph, but in profound relief. The Stormbringer was home, but he brought the scent of death and a victory that tasted of ashes. I watched from the high arch of the inner bailey, my hood drawn up against the icy drizzle. He rode not on his stallion, but on a litter borne by 4 of his most loyal guards. A thick bandage was visible beneath his torn cloak, dark with old blood. His face was pale, carved with exhaustion and pain, but his eyes scanned the battlements, the gathered faces, with a predator's alertness, even in weakness. They found me instantly, a magnetic pull that had nothing to do with sight. The bond, that stretched and quivering thread, sang. It was a torrent of sensation, searing pain from his wound, the bone-deep weariness of a leader who has paid for peace in the coin of his own people's blood, a grim satisfaction, and beneath it all, a raw, desperate need for sanctuary, for the one place, the one person where the king could cease to be. The court physicians descended, clucking like worried hens. He was carried not to the grand hall for accolades, straight to his private chambers.
He was carried not to the grand hall for accolades, but straight to his private chambers. The castle held its breath, the brief flare of celebration snuffed by the reality of their wounded sovereign. For 2 days he was sequestered. Roran stood guard, a living barricade. The bond was a muted, feverish thing, pulsing with pain and the thick fog of healing drafts. I did not try to see him. I felt his need for stillness, for the brutal process of knitting himself back together, body and soul. On the 3rd morning, a different summons came, not from a guard, but from Ilara. She entered my chamber, her face grave. "The king is awake. The fever has broken. He asks for you." She placed a small linen-wrapped bundle in my hands. "Take this. It is yarrow and moonwort from the highest meadow, for the pain that runs deeper than the blade." The walk to the royal chambers was the longest of my life. The corridors, once places of fear and suspicion, now felt charged with a different energy, a watchful, waiting hope. Roran stood outside the heavy oak door. He looked at me, really looked at me, his stern eyes holding a grudging new respect. He had seen the change in the castle's spirit in Kaelen's absence. "He is not himself," Roran warned quietly. "The wound is clean, but the fight, it aged him. Be gentle." He opened the door. The room was dim, lit only by a fire that danced in a great hearth. The air smelled of wood smoke, herbs, and the coppery tang of blood. Kaelen sat propped in a massive chair by the fire, wrapped in furs. He seemed smaller somehow, the immense power banked to a low, painful ember. But his gaze, when it lifted to me, was the same, all storm and intensity. "Leave us," he said to Roran, his voice a rough scrape of sound. The door closed, leaving us in the flickering silence. I stood just inside the room, clutching Ilara's herbs. The bond was wide open, a conduit for his pain, his vulnerability, a shame at being seen in this weakened state, and a yearning so profound it stole my breath. "You are standing as if I might bite," he said, a ghost of his old dry tone in his ruined voice. "You might," I replied softly, finding my courage. "Wounded wolves are often the most dangerous." A faint pained smile touched his lips. "Perhaps." He watched as I moved closer, my steps silent on the thick rugs. "Roran tells me you became a ghost who walked the walls, that you spoke to my guards, to my people." I mended threads, as best I could. It was all I knew to do. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes tracing my face as if memorizing it. "I received your message. The poison may yet linger." He let out a slow, careful breath. "You were right. Theron's last act was to confess in his dying snarls. Anya was not his only tool. There were others, deeper still, sleeping agents. The rot was not a limb to be cut off. It is a sickness in the blood of the kingdom itself." The dread I had felt since the healer's betrayal crystallized into a cold, hard certainty. The war was not over. It had just gone underground. "Then we find it. We root it out. Together." He shook his head, a slow, weary motion. "You say 'we' as if it is simple. Talia, look at me." His hand, usually so strong, gestured weakly at his bandaged side. "I led my men into a slaughterhouse. I won, but the cost. I can feel their ghosts in this room. I can smell their blood on my hands. This is the reality of a king. This is the darkness that comes with the crown. His eyes, haunted and fierce, held mine. The bond, it wants to pull you into that darkness, to wrap you in the same furs, stain you with the same blood. My wolf claims you, but the man knows that to truly bind you to me is to sentence you to this, to a life of poison, betrayal, and endless war. It was the most honest he had ever been. Not a king declaring fate, but a man confessing a terrible love. A love he believed was a death sentence. I knelt then, not in submission, but to be level with his chair. I placed Ilama's herbs on a small table and reached out, my fingers hovering just above the back of his hand where it rested on the fur. "You think your darkness is something you must bear alone," I whispered, the bond humming with my conviction. "But my sight was born in shadows, Kaelen. My truth is not of the sunny meadow, but of the tangled, hidden roots. I do not fear your darkness. I see it, just as I see the strength that holds it in check, the loyalty it inspires, the justice, however bloody, it delivers." Slowly, carefully, I let my fingertips brush his skin. A spark, not of passion, but of profound recognition traveled up my arm. His breath hitched. "You spoke of a window," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "A window was worth the risk, you said. But I am not a window, my king. I am not something you look through. I am the one standing beside you, looking out at the same storm. My gift is not to bring you light, but to help you see in the dark, to find the poison before it kills, to mend what is broken before it falls." I finally took his hand, lacing my fingers with his. His grip was weak, but it tightened, clinging to me as if I were the only solid thing in a shifting world. "You cannot sentence me to a darkness I already inhabit," I said, holding his stormy, wounded gaze. "The only sentence that would truly break me would be to be shut out of it, to be kept safe while you fight our battles alone." A shudder ran through him. The conflict in his eyes was a titanic struggle. The alpha's instinct to protect, to dominate, to shield his mate from all harm, warring with the dawning, terrifying realization that his mate's strength lay not in being shielded, but in being joined. "Then stand," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. "Stand with me, Talia. Not behind, not as a symbol, but as my weaver, my seer, my—" He hesitated, the word mate hanging unspoken but thunderous in the air between us. "My equal in this grim, glorious fate." It was not a proposal. It was a pact, forged in blood, in betrayal, in the quiet aftermath of a costly victory. He did not pull me into an embrace. He did not kiss me. He simply held my hand, our bonded marks touching, and in that simple, potent contact, a new alliance was born. Deeper than politics, older than law. An alliance of two wolves, one of storm and one of silver sight, who had chosen to face the lingering poison not as king and consort, but as partners in the coming silent war. The fire crackled, casting our joined shadows, large and inseparable against the stone wall. The darkness outside the castle was deep, but for the first time we faced it not as separate souls, but as one intertwined spirit. The final battle for the soul of the kingdom was ahead, and we would meet it together. The world did not change in a day. The stones of the iron-toothed castle remained cold. The mountain winds still held their bite. But the air within began to heal. Kaelen's recovery was slow, a deliberate forging of steel in a new fire. He did not hide his weakness, but bore it with a king's grace, allowing himself to be seen leaning on Roran's arm, his face pale, but his eyes clear. And I was there, not as a shadow, but as a steady presence at his left side, the side opposite his wound, a living testament to a new balance. The first official court gathering after his return was a tapestry of tension and awe. The high nobles, those whose loyalties had wavered in the shadow of Theron's ambition, stood in stiff silence. The air was thick with unspoken questions and fear. Kaelen did not ascend the throne. He stood before it, a concession to his injury, but it made him seem more approachable, more real. I stood beside him, dressed not in silks, but in a gown of deep gray wool, simple and strong, the color of a wolf's pelt at twilight. At my wrist, the mate mark glowed openly, a silent declaration. He spoke without preamble, his voice still carrying the rasp of pain, but also a new, unshakable certainty. A sickness festered in our pack. It fed on ambition and whispered poison. It cost us good wolves. It cost us trust. His hand, resting on the arm of his chair, clenched. That sickness has been cut out, but the scar remains. And scars make us wary. They make us fear the very bonds that should hold us together. He paused, and the silence was absolute. Then he turned his head just slightly toward me. It was a small gesture, but in the language of kings, it was a seismic shift. All eyes followed his gaze. This kingdom was built on a single truth, alpha strength. But there is another truth, older and almost forgotten, the truth of the weaver. The truth of the bond that sees not to dominate, but to unite, that mends where force can only break. He reached out then, not a command, but an invitation. His hand was open, palm up toward me. My heart swelled, a crescendo of emotion that sang through the bond, not just my own, but his as well. A fierce pride, a hard-won trust, and a love that was no longer a terrifying secret, but a cornerstone. I placed my hand in his. The contact sent a visible, gentle pulse of silvery gold light through our clasped fingers, a manifestation of the bond for all to see. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Strength alone is a fortress without a hearth. Sight without strength is a light with no sword to guard it. From this day forward, this iron-tooth kingdom is ruled by both, by the storm and by the sight, by your king and by your weaver. He did not call me queen. The old word did not fit. Weaver was older, truer. It was a title of function, of sacred duty, a recognition of the power I held and the service I would render. He turned back to the court, his expression settling into the familiar, unyielding lines of the Stormbringer, but now etched with a new purpose. The loyal will find their loyalty rewarded. The hesitant will be watched, and the poisonous will be found. By my strength and by her sight. This is our new covenant. This is how we heal. He did not ask for their approval. He declared a new reality. And in the face of his certainty and the silent, luminous proof of our joined hands, opposition crumbled into stunned acceptance. One evening, as the first true stars of winter pierced the velvet sky, he led me not to the council chamber or the library, but to the highest battlements. The world spread below us, a kingdom of shadows and silvered peaks sleeping under the watchful moon. The wind here was clean, scoured of intrigue and blood. He stood beside me, close enough that our cloaks brushed. The bond between us was a quiet, deep hum of contentment,
a settled thing, like the bedrock of the mountain itself. "It will never be easy," he said, his voice a low rumble in the vast quiet. "There will always be new threats, new shadows." "I know," I replied, looking out at our domain. "But now we face them with the same eyes." He was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke words that held the weight of a vow and the softness of a secret. "All my life I believed love was a distraction for kings, a flaw in the armor. What I felt for you, it terrified me more than any army. I thought it would be my undoing." He turned to face me fully. The moonlight caught the planes of his face, the strength and the scars, the storm and the peace that now lived side by side in his eyes. "But it was not my undoing, Talia. It was my remembering. You made me remember that a king is not just a sword. He is also the heart of his pack, and a heart needs a mate, not to serve it, but to make it whole." He cupped my face then, his touch calloused and infinitely gentle. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone. "I cannot give you a peaceful life, but I can give you a meaningful one, a true one, beside me." I leaned into his touch, the warmth of him banishing the last of the tower's chill from my soul. "Peace was never my destiny, Kaelen," I whispered, a smile touching my lips. "My destiny was a storm, and it was you." In his eyes, I saw not just the Alpha King, nor the wounded wolf, but the man, proud, fierce, flawed, and utterly mine. And in the bond I felt his wolf, that magnificent storm-pelted beast, not bowing, but standing shoulder to shoulder with my own silvery seeing spirit. Two halves of an ancient, powerful whole. He did not kiss me. The moment was too sacred for that. Instead, he rested his forehead against mine, a gesture of unity older than any kiss. We stood there, under the cold, brilliant moon, the king and the weaver, our breaths mingling in the air, our souls intertwined in a bond that had been tested by fire, betrayal, and blood, and had emerged not just unbroken, but unbreakable. Below us, the kingdom slept. Ahead of us, 1,000 challenges waited in the dawn. But we were no longer afraid of the dark, for we had learned to see in it, and we would face it, not as separate souls, but as one, together.